and welcome to Rambling and Gambling Sports YouTube channel. My name is James Evans, and today we are introducing a new sort of segment to the channel whereby I give my reflection onto last weekend's card that took place at the UFC Apex between Derek Brunson and Edmen Shahbazyan. But before we get into this, if you want to subscribe to the channel at Rambling and Gambling Sports YouTube channel, that would be gratefully appreciated. So to keep yourself up to date with content like this and various other sports that we upload, and yeah. Like I said, this is going to be a new segment of the show and of the channel whereby I reflect my thoughts on last weekend's card and various other cards that took place across the UFC. I'm going to break down the majority of the fights and give my predictions as to what should be next for various fighters. But yeah, like I said, make sure you subscribe, share this across your platforms. But before we get into this, be sure to follow my Twitter at EvansJames99. And I also run a professional UFC account by the name of UFC Deluxe. And also be sure to follow at And Gambling Sports to keep yourself with more content like this and to keep yourself busy and more interactive with the channel. Any support would be much gratefully appreciated. So let's get on to this. And like I said, the card was headlined between Edmen Shahbazyan and Derek Brunson. Now, looking prior to the fight, I think many were sort of backing Edmen to get the job done. He was undefeated. He was 22. He's 22, and he was like an undefeated prospect, coached and managed by Ronda Rousey, and there was a lot of hype behind this name and behind this guy. But obviously, the fight didn't really go his way, and I've seen many across social media saying that this is it for Edmen Shahbazyan. You know, he's bottled his chance. Everyone's sort of before the fight saw Derek Brunson as the sort of gatekeeper of the middleweight division, which is ludicrous. It's a shame what happened with Edmen Shahbazyan. However, for those that are doubting him and questioning his ability going forward, it's complete nonsense. You know, he will be back stronger than ever. Sometimes with a guy undefeated and that young, it sort of takes they sort of take a step back and sort of realise where they went wrong and sort of correct the mistakes and hopefully come back stronger than ever. You look at Chase Hooper. He's recently lost, and when he gets a fight next, it'll be interesting to see where his head's at mentally. But Edmen Shahbazyan, before that, produced some sensational highlight reel knockouts, so you can't rule him out just yet. It's very unfair that people are criticising him now and sort of saying this is it, the hype train sort of derailed. On the other hand, you've sort of got to give some respect to Derek Brunson. I mean, like I said, many sort of saw Derek as a gatekeeper for the top five and for the rest of the contenders in the middleweight division, but he sort of showed he's getting on a bit, but he's also showed that he's still hanging about. He can also do it. He can get the job done, and he's put his name right back in the mix. And fair play to Derek, because like I said, he's had his critics over the past few years, but to beat a guy like Edmen, the way he did it is sensational. But he came into the fight and. Like I said, many were doubting him, but come fight night, and the performance he put on was absolutely sensational. He came out of the blocks well, and the first one was sort of back and forth, both landing heavy shots, but Brunson sort of was slightly edging it on top. He sort of stuck to his game plan, and he sort of dug deep as the fight went on, and his patience sort of allowed him to remain effective in terms of his strike and how he landed effectively in the exchanges. And that's when we sort of saw Shahbazyan fade and take a step back and realise that he was sort of on the back foot losing the fight, and that spelled the beginning of the end for Shahbazyan, which is a shame. Many sort of believed going into it that Shahbazyan would finish him early, get the job done, but you've got to give some respect to Brunson just for his sheer relentless work rate and going into the third round whereby he got the finish. And like I said before that, he was very persistent and consistent in in the exchanges and in his striking. So you've got to put some respect into his name, and this is arguably one of Brunson's biggest wins of his career and sort of the best we've seen of Brunson in a while, and it sort of looks like he might make that breakthrough into the sort of top five. And it's good to see for a guy like Derek Brunson, who's been waiting for a while, with many people sort of questioning him. But what's next for Derek Brunson? It's tough to say. I mean, for a guy like Derek Brunson, like I said, he is getting on a bit, so it'll be interesting to see who the UFC match him up with. Personally, I think we're going to see Darren Till versus Jack Hermansson. So I reckon we'll probably see the winner. Derek Brunson face the winner of Yoel Romero versus Uriah Hall. It makes sense. They're both ranked in and around the sort of same position. There's not really many contenders out there. You could possibly throw Kelvin Gastelum in the mix. He's ranked just a place above Brunson in seventh, and he's coming off of a loss against Jack Hermansson. So it'll be interesting to see what the UFC do. As for Shahbazyan, maybe he might face the loser of Romero versus Hall. And looking back on it, he's defeated. He's currently ranked number 9 in the middleweight division. He's already beaten Brad Tavares and Amari Akhmedov. I believe he's got an upcoming fight with Chris Weidman, I believe. So I don't think we might see the winner of that fight face Shahbazyan. A particular name that stands out as well as Ian Heinisch and maybe Marvin Vettori. So there are options for Shahbazyan to sort of make a claim and sort of get back himself in contention to sort of prove that was wrong necessarily. But yeah, it's not the end of the day for Shahbazyan. Obviously, a lot of fighters lose. You got to keep your head up and get back to the drawing board and sort of pick out what went wrong and work on that. And I mark my words, we'll probably see a better Shahbazyan in his next fight, whether that be Hall, whether that be Akhmed, or whether that be Ian Heinisch, whether that be Vettori. And as for Brunson, he can only look up really, obviously with the likes of Kelvin Gastelum and Kelvin Gastelum or the winner of Yoel Romero versus Uriah Hall. So there are options for either fighters, but with Brunson, it's a big win. He performed very well in that fight. He made himself look like the better fighter right from the get-go, and the experience sort of paid off in terms of the striking. So you've got to put some respect into Brunson's name. And yeah, at the age of 36, or he's getting 36, 37, he's put himself right back in the mix to face a top 5 contender, to face, like I said, the likes of Kelvin Gastelum and Yoel Romero. And credit goes to Derek Brunson, because like I said, many were ruling him out earlier on. So yeah, big performance, and it was a reasonably not one-sided fight, but it was sort of a comfortable fight for Derek Brunson. And leading on to the main co-main event between Joanna Calderwood versus Jennifer Maia, and it's a shame to see the outcome of this fight going into this sort of co-main. Jojo was sort of the next in line to face Valentina. Hadn't COVID been a thing, and hadn't Valentina pulled out, picked up an injury throughout the year, which was a shame. For any fighter, you'd sort of wait until the champion came back, but you've got to give some respect to Joanna Calderwood, who decided, I want to keep fresh and keep active, and I want to fight before Valentina and sort of get a win just to keep myself active, keep myself fit. Jennifer Maia going into this fight, she wasn't on the best of runs. I believe she lost the last bout with Caitlin Chookagian, so it wasn't. She's not in the best of runs going into this fight, and if you're Joanna Calderwood, you'd sort of be biting the UFC's hand off for a fight like this. Obviously, hadn't it been Valentina, but it's heartbreaking to see Calderwood risk losing her title shot. So obviously, she came up short to Jennifer Maia, who lost via first round submission. It's a shame. She passed up on a golden opportunity, but like I said, credit where it's due. She didn't have to sort of take that fight, and like I said, Maia going into this fight wasn't in the best of runs, but with no disrespect to her at all. I mean, she did what she was supposed to. She implemented her game plan. She did what she was supposed to do. She's very slick on the mat, and obviously she got the submission finish, which sort of damages Joanna's sort of prospect and chance at a title, and sort of delays that chance. What's next for Joanna? It's a tough one. I'd probably say maybe Jessica Eye. That's that's a shout. It's a tough one as of right now. I mean, the flyweight division, it's full of good contenders, but it's not the most stacked division. It's a weird sort of state of affairs with the flyweight division. I think with Cynthia Calvillo, she defeated Jessica Eye recently, and this was a flyweight debut essentially, and she just, with the win over Jessica Eye, just bumped her immediately up to second, and that's how sort of weird the division is right now. And with Maia currently ranked 6th, she's going to get the next title shot against Valentina Shevchenko. So it's a bit of a weird sort of state of affairs with the women's flyweight division. But yeah, as I said, next for Joanna Calderwood, I'd probably say, like I said, Jessica I is ranked fifth in the flyweight division, and Joanna's ranked number 3, so it sort of makes sense. Yeah, I think that's the sort of the fight to make, and obviously, like I said earlier, Maya's definitely going to get the title shot next, and yeah, it's a no-brainer really. It's a shame for Joanna. Credit where it's due, though. I mean, she did not have to take that fight one bit. It was always many thought it was going to be a comfortable one sort of sided fight for Joanna, but again, respect to Maya and commiserations go to Joanna. And obviously, I can't wait to see who Joanna faces next, and I'm sure she'll get the win. And with a win potentially over Jessica Rai, that might give her a title shot over Valentina. Or if Jennifer Maia comes up with a big shot, potentially a rematch with Jennifer Maia if she defeats Valentina, which at the moment, from my personal opinion, no one's beating Valentina Shevchenko. It's a no-brainer, really. She's the queen of the flyweight division, and it's a long time coming. You know, we all wanted to see Valentina, the champion, in some sort of division, in some sort of capacity with the UFC. She's just so dominant, and she's an excellent fighter. And she's been in around the mixed martial arts game for a while. So to make a flyweight division and crown Valentina Shevchenko as a champion, I don't think we'll see anyone beat her in a long run, but it's a shame for Joanna. But moving swiftly on to Randy Brown versus Vicente Luque. What can I say, really? What a fight that was on on with regards to Vicente Luque. I mean, we all knew what Luque was capable of going into the fight. He's still young. He's still in late 20s, and the performance he put on was nothing short of spectacular. Really, you've got to put a lot of respect on Luque's name after coming off of that loss to Stephen Thompson. It's always going to be difficult to come back, but you know, fair play to him. He's got back on the winning streak and produced a sensational knockout, and he was just so dominant in his striking and just in his overall performance, really. And like I said, credit to Luque, and I'm a big fan of him personally. He's just such a hard hitting striker, and he just brings that sort of energetic presence to the cage. And I always love watching Vicente Luque fight because he loves to bring it, and he's got a very strong background going into the UFC with his striking, with his sort of Brazilian MMA mixed martial arts back in the day. And like I said earlier, he lost to Stephen Thompson, and which was sort of his breakthrough moment in the welterweight division. You know, a win over Stephen Thompson would have sort of put himself on the map. He lost via the unanimous decision. He went back to the drawing board and came back against Nico Price, I believe, at UFC 249 in May. Won via doctor's stoppage, TKO in round number 3, and again to fight a couple of months later against Randy Brown just shows Luque's back in a way. I believe at the top of my head he's ranked at number 11 in the division, so he produced a big win over Randy Brown. I believe he called out Nate Diaz after the fight. I mean, as a UFC fan, you just love to see that fight, but when you look at it on paper, Nate Diaz isn't going to come back for a guy like Vicente Luque. He's going to come back for obviously your Masvidals, your McGregors, your superstar fights. So when you look at it on paper, what's next for Luque? I'd probably go and throw a name there. Probably say Michael Chiesa. That would be a good fight for Luque. Like I said, he's ranked 11, Luque, with Michael Chiesa ranked number 8 in the division, and Michael Chiesa is currently on a phenomenal streak right now, and probably one of his best of his career, really. I think he's just recently beat. Well, I say recently, he defeated Rafael dos Anjos via decision in January, and before that, he defeated Diego Sanchez, and before that, he defeated Condit. So he's on a 3-fight winning streak. Ranked number 8 in the welterweight division. Perfect. In an ideal world, I'd say Dana White should sort of book Michael Chiesa and Vicente Luque at the end of the year, if not early 2021, because that'd be a great fight. Both fighters on a current winning streak, with Luque on a 2-fight winning streak and Michael Chiesa on a 3-fight winning streak. It'd be interesting to see whether the matchmakers will sort of look ahead to that fight. Unfortunately for Randy Brown, he was signed on a couple of years ago by Dana White as a sort of hot prospect in 2016, I believe, and there's a bit of a potential around Randy Brown's name, and it's a shame he's never really lived up to that effort. And despite valiant effort last weekend against Vicente Luque. He's just, I think Vicente Luque's offence was sort of too much for a guy like Randy Brown. It's just a shame with Luque targeting Brown's sort of legs early on, and it's just a sort of, that was Brown's downhill from then on in. And sort of a late knee in the second round was the beginning of the end, and obviously got the finish, and yeah, which is a shame. And moving on, I think we had, well, I think it was Trevin Giles versus Kevin Holland, but obviously, unfortunately for Trevin Giles, he had to pull out a couple hours before the fight, which is a shame. I believe he fainted in his corner and in his room or something like that, so the UFC had to scratch that one, which is a shame really, because that was an interesting fight. I was looking forward to seeing that fight between Kevin Holland and Trevin Giles, sort of seeing where both fighters were at, and obviously that sort of pushed the next fight I'm going to talk about between Bobby Green and Nando Venata up to sort of settle the score really, because they've both got to finish it in terms of, they had a score settle. As I said, it was a draw, I believe, a couple of years ago, 3 years ago at 217, I think, at the top of my head. So both fighters wanted to pick off where they left off. They're both not in the best of runs as of right now. They're very inconsistent. With this fight, it certainly lived up to a fair people's expectations and probably exceeded it, really. I think there's a fair few that sort of overlooked this fight and weren't overly fond, but when you look at the fight, I mean, what a scrap that was. They both secured knockdowns early on. They both had their sort of edgy, flashy moments on, but throughout the fight, it was clear that Bobby Green was the better fighter, securing the win, and he looked very clean in terms of his striking and this sort of offence going forward, and it was sort of a dominant fight by Bobby Green towards the end. Rightly so. He picked up the win and via unanimous decision, which might have shocked many people. But going into the fight, Bobby Green obviously came off that recent win over Clay Guida, which wasn't the most entertaining of fights, which probably put people off favouring Green in that fight. But a big win over Venata sort of revitalised his career, and obviously on a 2-fight win streak, I believe, he certainly put himself back, certainly in the mix after an abysmal couple years whereby he's just so inconsistent, picking up losses here and there. So it was a big win for Bobby Green. It certainly revitalised his career, and it'll be interesting to see who he gets matched up with next. I personally don't see him being fighting a ranked opponent yet. I mean, he's more of a veteran of the sport. He's getting on a bit. I believe at the top of my head, he's 30. He's 33. So he's fought around. He's fought in around the company for a while. He's getting on a bit. 33. It's just a case of what's next, really. He's fought so long. He's such a veteran of the sport. Whether the UFC are interested in booking him against a ranked opponent yet, we'll see. I don't think we'll see him fight a top 15 contender next. But, credit to Bobby Green. It was a brilliant performance, and thoroughly deserved the victory, which wrapped up the main card, really. And then obviously the next fight between Jonathan Martinez and Frankie Saenz. Jonathan Martinez defeated Frankie via third round TKO, which was a shame going into the fight, really. It was marred by the missing weight of Jonathan Martinez, which sort of that's always going to be the talking point following the fight, which was a shame, really, after Jonathan Martinez's impressive win over Frankie. He obviously knocked him down a couple of times before finishing off with a brutal knee in the third. He improved, what I noticed with Martinez, he improved with his defence, with Frankie sort of looking to take the fight down to the mat a couple of times, but that was sort of key which led to the finish, really, his defence and sort of managing to keep the fight standing. And hadn't that sort of, if he made weight against Frankie, maybe that would sort of add fuel to the fire in what was an impressive victory and made Dana White think we've got a new contender in the bantamweight division. It's a shame that was, like I said, it was marred by missing weight, not just by like half a pound or a pound. It was 4.5 pounds, which meant that the bout had to be at 140 at catch weight in the end, which is a shame. Which sort of, like I said, marred the sort of occasion, and it'll be interesting to see who Martinez faces next. If he make weight at bantamweight next in his next fight, and if he wins that fight, then maybe we'll see him break into the top 15 against your John Dodsons, maybe Nathaniel Wood as well. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see who Martinez faces next. I don't think it'll be a top 15 ranked opponent yet. If he wins his next fight, then we'll see him face the sort of top 15 contenders. Next up was Nathan Manis versus Johnny Munoz, and obviously Nathan Manis coming up on top via a decision, and like I said, he picked up the unanimous decision victory, which is which was a bit of a weird one, really. I think the rest of the fights on this card were which went the full distance, and with Manis, he sort of stalled in the early on in terms of the majority of Munoz's takedowns, which led Manis to sort of chip away late on and sort of take the fight to Munoz later on. But obviously, early on in the first few rounds, he sort of picked apart, and sort of after that, it really fizzled out a bit, which sort of marred his performance, and it wasn't the most interesting fights, to say the least. It was an impressive performance at times by Munoz, but it was a shame, really. I think in terms of his grappling skills, he showed that he sort of was desperate to get the fight to the floor and sort of implement his grappling skills early on, which at times it succeeded, but unfortunately the shots sort of a lot of the groin shots, as you will, sort of that before the were penalised, sort of marred the fight, and sort of it's a weird one, really. I think Manis obviously did enough to get the decision victory, whichever way you see it, and it wasn't the most entertaining of fights, but a featherweight fight with Manis and Munoz. It'll be interesting to see who Manis faces next, and like I said, it wasn't the most convincing wins, but again, it'll be interesting to see who Manis faces next, which leads us on to another featherweight bout between Jamal Emmers versus Vincent Cachero, another unanimous decision victory for Jamal. It'd be interesting to see who he faces next. There was certainly a sort of size disparity, which is obvious between Jamal Emmers and against a guy like Cachero, who's obviously a natural bantamweight, which is a shame for Cachero, which is obviously the cause of his own downfall in that fight. It was clear who the bigger fighter was. It's a shame for Cachero. Emmers just sort of picked him apart early and using his reach and his sort of substantial difference in terms of his size to sort of pick apart Cachero, using his high volume of straight punches and especially succeeding in the clinch and sort of brutalising Cachero with a couple of knees. So it's a shame, really, for Cachero. You can tell who the bantamweight was and who the featherweight was coming into the fight, and Emmers did enough with everything in his power to sort of finish or sort of edge the scorecards, and he could have finished the fight, in my opinion. Emmers, he did a lot in terms of his striking and sort of showed throughout the fight that he had the ability to finish the fight, but unfortunately Cachero, he had to settle for a decision victory, and which leads us on to our first and obviously final discussion, and the first fight between Chris Gutierrez and Cody Durden, which is a surprise, really. It finished in a unanimous draw, which is when do we see a unanimous draw? I don't think we rarely see that. I mean, it's a weird one with Cody Durden. He came out sort of smothering Chris Gutierrez early on, securing I believe he secured the early round at 10-8 and from each judge, and unfortunately for Cody, it sort of went downhill after that fight, after that round, allowing Gutierrez to sort of get back into the fight and allowed him to implement his game plan and sort of look to get ahead on the judges' scorecards. And unfortunately for Chris Gutierrez, that the draw sort of halts his 3-fight winning streak, which is a shame. I think the 10-8 round early on didn't do Gutierrez any favour, which was a weird one for Gutierrez. He's probably going to beat himself up. But Chris Gutierrez, it'll be interesting to see what's next at 29. He's 15-4, and like I said, it halted a 3-fight winning streak. If he got the win over Cody Durden, a newcomer, it'll be interesting to see who he'd face next and where he'd stay at featherweight, or whether he'd go to bantamweight, or whether he'd return to featherweight, or whether he'd return to bantamweight. It'd be interesting to see. But no, it is a bit of a weird one. I think the early rounds for Cody Durden didn't sort of do Chris any favours, but he sort of came back into the fight, and yeah, that sort of concludes today's episode, and obviously the reflection piece of last weekend's fight between Brunson and Shahbazyan. This, like I said earlier, this will sort of be a regular thing, and make sure you're subscribed to Rambling the Gambling Sports YouTube channel for more content like this. And yeah, thank you for joining us, and be sure to share. And yeah, see you next time.